What happens when a warrior's sense of honor collides with the brutal reality of the frontier? When one single choice sets off a chain of events so catastrophic, it threatens to burn two worlds to the ground? This is that story. The sun over the Texas plains in 1868 wasn't just hot. It was a physical weight. It punished the land and every living thing on it. For Swift Hawk, a warrior of the Comanche, it was just another day. He'd just returned from a hunt when he saw them. A pack of young warriors, their laughter sharp and cruel, circling something in the dirt. As he got closer, the circle parted, and he saw her, a white woman, kneeling. Her blonde hair a tangled mess, her dress torn. She was a captive, taken in a raid 2 moons ago. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She had caused no trouble, but now she was the center of a storm. "She tried to steal a horse," spat Red Wolf, the group's leader. "She was escaping." Swift Hawk looked at the woman. For the first time she met his gaze. There was fear in her eyes, but underneath it, a core of pure, unbending steel. "I was not stealing," she said, her Comanche words broken but clear. "I was getting water." Swift Hawk's eyes fell to the ground. He saw an overturned water skin, its contents staining the dry earth. And next to it, half hidden, something else. A small, beaded leather pouch. Not Comanche. It was the kind settlers used for carrying valuables. He looked back at Red Wolf, and he saw the lie in the young warrior's eyes. But he also saw fear. Red Wolf hadn't just been tormenting a captive. He had been trying to take something from her. Something she had found. "You dishonor our people," Swift Hawk said, his voice low and dangerous. He extended his hand to Sarah. "Come. You will not be harmed further. I give you my word." He pulled her to her feet, ignoring the venomous glares from the other warriors. As they walked toward the safety of his mother's tepee, he knew this was far from over. He had just stepped into a story that had begun long before he arrived, and he had a sickening feeling that the small pouch Red Wolf had been so desperate to get was the first chapter. Chief Black Cloud's eyes were as old and hard as the stones of the earth. He listened as Swift Hawk explained what had happened, his face an unreadable mask. "You have always sympathized too much with our enemies," the chief said, smoke from his pipe coiling between them. "And now you protect one." "I protected the honor of our people," Swift Hawk countered. "There is no honor in tormenting a defenseless woman." A long silence stretched. Swift Hawk could feel the weight of the chief's gaze, a physical pressure. He was being tested. "Very well," Black Cloud said finally. "The woman will remain. But she is now your responsibility, Swift Hawk. If she attempts escape, if she brings any trouble to this camp, it will be your head." Swift Hawk accepted without hesitation. It was a heavy burden, but it was the only way to keep her safe. But when he returned to his mother's tepee, the old woman, Singing Bird, looked at him with worried eyes. "Be careful, my son," she whispered in their native tongue. "The chief's heart has grown hard. He sees your father's spirit in you, and he fears it. He has given you this white woman not as a test of your honor, but as a stone to weigh you down. He hopes you will fail." The words sent a chill through Swift Hawk. This wasn't a simple judgment. It was a political move. Black Cloud saw him as a rival. He was being set up to fail, to be disgraced. And Sarah was the bait. Later, he confronted her. He held out his hand. "The pouch," he said in English. "The one Red Wolf tried to take." Sarah's eyes widened, but she shook her head. "I don't know what you're talking about." He saw the lie, but he also saw the terror behind it. She was protecting something, something she was willing to die for. His world, once so simple, was becoming a maze of lies and secrets. He was caught between a hostile chief, a resentful warrior, and a captive who was clearly hiding a dangerous truth. And then, the scouts rode in. Their news was a thunderclap that shook the entire camp. The white soldiers were building a new fort, not just anywhere, but on sacred ground, where Buffalo Creek meets the Red River. The War Council was a storm of angry voices. "We attack now," cried one of the older warriors. "We drive them out before their walls are strong." Swift Hawk knew this was suicide. He had seen the power of the Army's big guns. "We should send a delegation," he urged. "Speak with their leader. A delegation would also allow us to see their strength, their numbers." Black Cloud agreed, his eyes glinting. "And you, Swift Hawk, will lead it. You speak their tongue." It was another trap. A mission he was not expected to survive. But he could not refuse. As he prepared to leave, Sarah approached him. "My father," she said, her voice trembling. "He is a minister, Reverend Mitchell. If he is at the fort, please, just let them know I am alive." Swift Hawk froze. The world seemed to stop. Reverend Mitchell. He knew that name. Years ago, a minister named Mitchell had arranged a peace talk, but it had been an ambush. Renegade soldiers had slaughtered a dozen Comanche women and children. Swift Hawk's own little sister had been among them. He had always believed Mitchell set them up. And now, the minister's daughter was his responsibility, his captive. Was this a coincidence? Or was this the spirits finally offering him a chance at justice? Or vengeance? He looked at Sarah's pleading eyes. She had no idea of the history that name held for him. The hate he had carried for years was a living thing in his chest. His mission was no longer about peace for his tribe. It was about confronting the man who had destroyed his family. He rode toward the new fort with a storm in his heart, a man caught between two worlds and two sworn duties, to protect the woman who was his responsibility and to destroy the man who was her father. The new fort was a raw, ugly scar on the land. Colonel James Harrington was a man with a gray beard and eyes as hard as nails. He listened to Swift Hawk's plea for peace with a stony expression. But it was the man standing beside him, the chaplain in his black coat, who made Swift Hawk's blood run cold. Reverend Mitchell. He was older, his face etched with grief, but it was him, the man from his nightmares. "We have a white woman living among us," Swift Hawk said, his voice steady, betraying none of the fire raging inside him. "A teacher." "Sarah!" Reverend Mitchell cried out, pushing forward. "My daughter, is she well?" "She is alive and unharmed," Swift Hawk replied, his gaze like chips of ice. The reunion his words promised felt like a betrayal to his own dead. The negotiations were a blur. Boundaries were discussed, treaties mentioned. But all Swift Hawk could see was the face of the man who had cost him his sister. The colonel agreed to a formal council in 10 days to finalize the peace and to arrange for Sarah's return. Before he left, Reverend Mitchell pressed a sealed letter into his hand. "For my daughter," he said, his eyes wet with tears. "Please, let her know her father prays for her return." Swift Hawk took the letter. It felt like a snake in his hand. He rode back to the Comanche camp, the paper a burning coal in his pouch. The man's grief seemed genuine, but Swift Hawk had learned long ago that the white man's tears could be as false as their promises. When he gave the letter to Sarah, she wept with joy. She read it by the firelight, her face transformed by hope. She told him what it said, that her father loved her, that he was negotiating for her release, that she would be home soon. But as she read, Swift Hawk noticed something. Her eyes would dart back to the first line of each paragraph. She would read a word, then another, her lips moving silently. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. This was not how a person read a letter from their father. This was how a person decoded a message. His blood turned to ice. He had been a fool. The grief, the tears. It was all an act. Sarah wasn't just a captive. She was a spy. And the letter wasn't a loving note. It was a set of instructions. That night, after Sarah was asleep, he took the letter. His knowledge of the written English language was limited, but his father had taught him to see patterns. He looked where she had looked. The first word of each paragraph. Enemy, chief, council, ambush. The peace talks were a lie. They were a trap. They were using Sarah to lure Black Cloud and the other leaders into the open. It was going to be a massacre. All over again. And the woman he had protected, the woman he had begun to feel a strange connection to, was a part of it. She was her father's daughter, after all. He looked at her sleeping form, her face peaceful and innocent. But he knew now what lay beneath. The heart of a killer. He had a choice to make: warn Black Cloud and doom Sarah as a traitor, or stay silent and let his people walk into a slaughter. The honor his father had taught him and the hatred he had carried for years were at war, and the fate of everyone he knew rested on his decision. The next 10 days were a living hell. Swift Hawk was a ghost in his own camp, his face a mask of stone. He told no one what he had discovered. If he revealed Sarah's treachery, Black Cloud would kill her without a second thought. And as much as he hated her for her betrayal, the thought of her death left a cold, hollow space in his gut. He was her guardian. Her life was his responsibility. It was a paradox that was tearing him apart. He watched her. He saw the new life in her eyes, the genuine way she laughed with his mother. He saw her teaching the children how to make letters in the dirt. Was it all a lie? Could someone be that good of an actor? Or was there a piece of this puzzle he was missing? The night before the council, he confronted her. "The letter," he said, his voice a low growl. "I know what it really says." The color drained from her face. Fear, pure and absolute, flashed in her eyes. I can explain." "Explain what?" he snarled. "That you have been lying to me since the beginning? That you are helping your father plan a massacre?" "No, that's not it," she cried, her voice a desperate whisper. "You saw the words, but you don't understand the meaning. It's not a plan, it's a warning." He stared at her, his mind reeling. "A warning?" "My father is a prisoner as much as I am," she explained, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "That man, Colonel Harrington, his last post was at Sand Creek. He believes the only way to deal with your people is to exterminate them. He found out who my father was, that he had a history of trying to make peace. He's using my father, using me, as bait. My father knew he couldn't write it plainly. The message, it was for me. He was telling me to warn you. Sand Creek. The name was a black stain on the history of the frontier. A brutal, horrific massacre of Cheyenne and Arapaho, mostly women and children. If Harrington was from there, then Sarah was telling the truth. The man was a butcher. Suddenly, every piece shifted. Sarah wasn't a spy. She was a pawn, just like him. Her father wasn't a monster. He was a man trying to prevent another slaughter. And the real enemy wasn't just the army, but the madman who led it. "Tomorrow," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "When your chiefs are all gathered, Harrington's men will surround them. He means to kill them all." At that moment, Red Wolf appeared at the teepee entrance. He had heard their hushed, frantic conversation. He had heard the words ambush and kill them all. But he hadn't heard the context. All he saw was the white woman and the man who protected her, speaking in whispers on the eve of the peace council. His eyes burned with suspicion and hatred. He said nothing. He just backed away into the darkness, his mind twisting what he had heard into a new, terrible shape. Swift Hawk knew they were out of time. He had to get to Black Cloud. He had to convince him the peace talk was a trap. But as he burst from the teepee, he was met by Red Wolf and a dozen other warriors, their faces grim, their weapons drawn. "Traitor," Red Wolf spat. "We heard you plotting with the White Witch. You planned to lead our chiefs into a trap." Before Swift Hawk could speak, before he could explain, they were on him. The fight was brutal and short. Swift Hawk was a great warrior, but he was outnumbered. He was clubbed from behind, and the world exploded into a shower of stars. He collapsed into the dust, his last conscious thought of Sarah's terrified face. When he woke, he was tied, bound and gagged in a storage teepee. The sun was already high in the sky. The council, it was already happening. He could hear the faint sound of speeches from the council circle. Black Cloud and the other chiefs were walking right into Harrington's guns. He struggled against his bonds, but they were tight. He was helpless. He was going to have to listen as his people were slaughtered. All because of a misunderstanding. All because of the honor that had compelled him to protect a single, captive woman. From the storage teepee, Swift Hawk could hear the drone of the peace council. Every passing minute was a turn of the knife in his gut. He was a warrior, bound and helpless, while his leaders walked toward their deaths. He tested his ropes again, the rough hemp biting into his wrists. Useless. Then the flap of the teepee was pulled back. It was his mother, Singing Bird. Her face was a mask of sorrow, but her eyes were fierce. In her hands, she held a small, sharp flint knife. She said nothing. She didn't need to. She sliced through his bonds, her movements quick and certain. Red Wolf's heart is ruled by hate, she whispered in Comanche. He does not see the truth. But I see the heart of my son, and I see the heart of the white woman. She pressed a pistol into his hand, an old, heavy Colt Patterson he hadn't seen in years. It had belonged to his father. Sarah gave it to me, Singing Bird explained. She said her father had it hidden. She said you would know what to do. Swift Hawk's heart leaped. The gun was a symbol, a message. It meant Sarah was not just a victim. She was fighting back. He burst from the teepee, blinking in the bright sun. The main camp was eerily quiet, most of the warriors at the council circle. He saw Sarah then, standing near the edge of the clearing, held between two of Red Wolf's men. Red Wolf himself stood with his arms crossed, watching the council, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. He was waiting for the trap to spring so he could be proven right. The council was taking place in an open meadow a few hundred yards from the main camp. Swift Hawk could see the chiefs seated in a circle with Colonel Harrington and his delegation. And he saw what they couldn't see. On the ridges surrounding the meadow, hidden in the trees, were the glinting rifle barrels of dozens of cavalrymen. The trap was set. He had no time. He couldn't run to the council. They'd shoot him down before he got halfway there. There was only one path. He looked at the herd of Comanche war ponies, grazing peacefully nearby. An idea, born of pure desperation, exploded in his mind. He ran towards the herd, letting out a piercing war cry that shattered the afternoon's calm. The warriors guarding Sarah spun around in shock. Red Wolf's jaw dropped. The ponies, startled, began to stampede. Swift Hawk vaulted onto the back of the nearest Mustang, clinging to its mane. He fired the Colt into the air once, twice, 3 times, his cries urging the herd on. He drove them not away from the council, but directly towards it. The ground shook as 100 horses thundered across the meadow. The chiefs and the soldiers leaped to their feet in confusion. On the ridges, the hidden cavalrymen were caught off guard. Do they shoot? Do they hold their fire? The wave of horseflesh was a chaotic, unstoppable force. Swift Hawk, riding at the head of the stampede, was a terrifying figure. He guided the herd to pass just beside the council circle, creating a massive, swirling wall of dust and panicked animals. It was the diversion they needed. "It's a trap!" he screamed in Comanche as he passed the chiefs. "To the trees!" Black Cloud, his eyes wide, understood instantly. He and the other chiefs ran for the cover of the woods, disappearing into the chaos. Colonel Harrington, his face purple with rage, was screaming orders. "Fire! Fire at will!" But it was too late. His targets were gone. The carefully planned ambush had dissolved into a panicked mess of rearing horses and blinded soldiers. Swift Hawk wheeled his pony around, looking back towards the camp. He saw Sarah. In the confusion, she had broken free from her guards. She was running, not towards the safety of the soldiers, but towards him. Red Wolf, seeing his plans, his authority, his entire worldview crumbling, let out a roar of fury. He raised his rifle, not at the soldiers, but at the source of his humiliation. At Sarah. Swift Hawk saw it happen. The world seemed to slow down. He spurred his horse, charging back towards her, a desperate, impossible race against a bullet. He was still 20 yards away when Red Wolf fired. He saw Sarah stumble, a small cry escaping her lips. She collapsed to the ground. A blind, white-hot rage, unlike anything he had ever known, consumed Swift Hawk. He didn't slow down. He charged directly at Red Wolf, leaping from his horse's back at the last second. He crashed into the other warrior, and they went down in a tangle of limbs. His father's pistol was gone, lost in the fall. All that was left was his hands and his fury. The fight was savage and primal. When it was over, Red Wolf lay still. Swift Hawk scrambled to his feet and ran to Sarah. She was lying in the dust, her eyes fluttering open. There was a dark stain spreading on the sleeve of her deerskin dress. "Swift Hawk," she whispered, her voice weak. He knelt, gathering her into his arms, his heart breaking. "You came back for me. I give my word," he choked out, the phrase that had started it all. He looked up. The cavalry was regrouping, their rifles now aimed at him. The Comanche warriors were emerging from the camp, their faces a mixture of confusion and anger. He was alone, in the middle of a battlefield he had created, holding the woman he had crossed worlds to protect. He had saved his people, but he might have just lost everything else. The standoff was a silent, screaming thing. The cavalry, their rifles leveled, formed a line. Opposite them, the Comanche warriors, now understanding the betrayal, prepared for a fight. In the middle, Swift Hawk held the wounded Sarah, a single, defiant figure caught between two worlds. He looked at her pale face, at the blood on her arm. This had to end. Gently, he laid her on the ground and stood, his hands raised and empty. "Enough!" he bellowed, his voice echoing across the silent meadow. He walked toward Colonel Harrington, who sat on his horse, his face a thundercloud. "This is not a battle," Swift Hawk said. "It is a crime. Your crime." He pointed a finger at the furious officer. "This man planned to murder our chiefs under a flag of truce. He is a man with no honor." From the edge of the trees, Chief Black Cloud emerged, flanked by his warriors. He had heard. "He speaks the truth," Black Cloud called out. "We came in peace. You met us with treachery." Just then, a wagon came rattling over the rise from the fort. In it was Reverend Mitchell. He had been told to wait, but his anxiety had gotten the better of him. He saw the scene, the armed lines, the body of Red Wolf, and his daughter, lying wounded on the ground. With a cry of anguish, he leaped from the wagon and ran to her side. Colonel Harrington saw his chance to regain control. "You see?" he shouted to his men. "They have shot an unarmed white woman. Fire!" But before his men could obey, Reverend Mitchell stood up, placing himself between Sarah and the soldiers' rifles. "No!" he screamed, his voice filled with a power no one had ever heard from him before. "You will not fire! This man," he pointed a trembling finger at Harrington, "this man is the devil here. He threatened my daughter's life to force my cooperation. He planned this ambush. I will not be a party to another Sand Creek." The name hit the soldiers like a physical blow. Sand Creek. Even among the cavalry, it was a name spoken with shame. The soldiers hesitated, their rifles wavering. They looked at their furious colonel, then at the passionate minister, then at the silent, watching Comanche. They had been lied to. This wasn't a righteous battle. It was a planned execution. "Arrest that man," a new voice commanded. It was the young officer who had stood with Harrington at the fort. He drew his own pistol and aimed it squarely at his commanding officer. "You have disgraced the uniform, Colonel. You are relieved of command." The soldiers, given a moral way out, obeyed instantly. They surrounded Harrington, who sputtered in rage as he was pulled from his horse, his plot in ruins. In the aftermath, a strange, fragile peace settled. Black Cloud and the young officer, a captain named Hayes, agreed to honor the original treaty. The sacred lands would be respected. Sarah's wound was bound. It was a clean shot through the fleshy part of her arm, painful, but not life-threatening. Swift Hawk stood by as her father helped her into the wagon. This was it. She was leaving. "You saved my life," she said, her eyes locking with his. "Again." "I gave my word," he replied, the simple phrase now holding the weight of everything that had passed between them. She reached out and touched the small wooden cross that still hung around his neck. "Someday, Swift Hawk," she said softly, "may our two worlds find a way to live in peace." He touched the turquoise beads at her wrist. "You gave us a voice, Sarah Mitchell. We will not forget it." As the wagon pulled away, he felt a profound sense of loss, a hollow space he knew would never quite be filled. A month later, a government wagon arrived at the Comanche camp, loaded with supplies. With it was a letter for Swift Hawk. It was from Sarah. She wrote that Colonel Harrington was facing a court-martial, that Captain Hayes was honoring the treaty, and that she was starting a school at the fort, a school where both settler and Comanche children, if they wished, could come to learn. At the bottom, she had written a single phrase in his language: "Until we meet again, under peaceful skies." Swift Hawk looked out across the vast plains, the land his people now shared. The peace was fragile. The future was uncertain. But for the first time, there was hope. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that his path and the path of the teacher from a different world were destined to cross again. The story of Swift Hawk and Sarah Mitchell is a powerful reminder that true honor isn't about the laws you follow, but the choices you make when those laws fail. It shows us that courage can bloom in the most unlikely of hearts, and that a bridge between two worlds can be built by two people who are brave enough to see the humanity in each other. Their journey, forged in conflict and sealed by a mutual desire for peace, didn't just save their people from a war. It planted the seeds of a new understanding that would ripple across the frontier for years to come. What do you think is the most important ingredient for peace? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of courage, honor, and unexpected alliances captured your imagination, please give this video a like, share it with your friends, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable tales from the heart of the American West. Thanks for watching.